Morning, everyone. My name is Tiffany Willoughby Herrard, and I'm the president of the National Conference of Black Political Scientists. I'm also an associate professor of African American Studies at the University of California at Irvine. I am delighted to join the Pi Sigma Alpha Conference on this wonderful panel that celebrates NCOBPS, NCOBPS, and Pi Sigma Alpha. We are building and strengthening each other through our collaboration. So I have about a minute to share with you a little bit of the history of the National Conference of Black Political Scientists. In April 1969, approximately 35 Black political scientists gathered at Southern University in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, to discuss the problems faced by persons teaching political science at historically Black colleges and universities. The group reconvened in September of that year at the annual meeting of the American Political Science Association in New York in September. It was the consensus of this broader group that the problems facing Black political scientists, independent of their geographical location or institution or training, were sufficiently similar to warrant establishment of a national organization. And I'm happy to add that after NCOBPS was founded, we fostered and catalyzed a number of other organizations, including the African Heritage Studies Association, the Association for the Study of Black Women in Politics, and the National Council of Black Studies. Indeed, nearly every Black Studies department that was founded any place in the United States had as its founding and inaugural chair a member of NCOBPS, a Black political scientist. Consequently, the persons present at this September 1969 meeting voted to establish themselves as the National Conference of Black Political Scientists, with their first annual meeting at Atlanta University in Georgia in May 1970. Our mission is to study, enhance, and promote the political aspirations of people of African descent in the United States and throughout the world. We aim to contribute to the resolution of the many challenges that Black people confront. Our organization promotes research in and critical analysis of topics usually overlooked and or marginalized in political science scholarship. So at the founding of APSA's Race and Ethnic Politics Group, we were there. We supported it. At the founding of the Latino Caucus, we were there. We supported the founding of it. We believe that our scholarship must address wide-ranging, real-world issues and not the narrow and often manufactured concerns of the discipline. NCOBPS has over 400 active members representing colleges, universities, policy organizations, community action groups, nonprofits, government relations, political campaign firms, local, national, and state and federal government agencies. Our collective membership teaches an estimated 1,000 undergraduate and graduate courses each year. With an average class of size of 20 students, we have contact with 20,000 students each year. We also have a storied tradition of mentoring and supporting students interested in political science, including areas of political communication, political psychology, public policy and administration, public affairs, comparative politics, international relations, political history, American political development, and political theory. We offer scholarships, fellowships, and research awards to undergraduate and graduate students, and provide many activities for students to network and collaborate with faculty and practitioners of political science. We are so honored to be with you today at Pi Sigma Alpha. We have joining us, and I'm just going to give the names according to my screen. Felicity Stone Richards, a PhD student at the University of California, Santa Barbara. Mzilikazi Kone, who is a political science professor at the College of the Desert here in California. Jasmine Noel Yarish, who is a political science professor at the University of the District of Columbia. Zara Ahmed, who is a political science professor at St. Mary's College of California. DeAndre Ori, who is a political science professor at Jackson State University and one of our champions of mentoring. Professor Ori will perhaps tell you how many PhD students have come out of his shop at some point as we're moving along. But we're so proud and grateful to have you, Dr. Ori. Professor Kurt Young, who is the chair of the political science department at Clark Atlanta University. Whoop, whoop, Clark Atlanta, we love you. And Professor Boris Ricks, who's a professor of political science at Cal State University, Northridge. Closest to me here at Irvine and close in my heart, because my brother, Dr. Ricks, and I always get down about how we understand the state of California education and what we can do to improve it. So thank you everybody for being here. We're going to start with a question by my colleague, for my colleagues. And we have 3 prearranged questions. And after you finish your comments, if you'd popcorn to the next person, and if you don't remember, I'll give you a signal. So this is a question for Professor Kone, Professor Young, and Professor Ori. What is the most pressing concern for Black politics locally, nationally, or globally as you understand it?
Good morning. I'm happy to start, and I want to thank you for the invitation to be here. It is always a pleasure to be in community, and particularly with colleagues from NCOBPS. As I was considering the response to this question, I found myself slightly confounded because the issues I found to be both local as well as national issues that are pressing. So in my assessment, I'm still thinking about local issues like COVID, which of course is a national and international issue. I'm thinking about the summer uprising of 2020 within the United States and the response to the uprising in politics. So after having the largest social movement in the country and this largest organizing, we see the political response 2 years later to be a pushback against the support, the movement for Black lives. And we see the pushback directly in pushing to limit access, whether it be anti-critical race theory laws. And you see, as I discuss here, it's both local and national right now in the US, these anti-CRT laws, which are being used as a catch-all for anything race related, right, is being accused of, rather, to be CRT. Of course, as we tend to note, without any real basis in what CRT is. Moving forward, I would also say that, I'm just going to move to, well, local issues continue. Evictions, right, which have left the news, right? Mass evictions, food insecurity, the things that were pressing when we saw in the middle of COVID, in the beginning of COVID, have left the news completely. So an end to discussions on mass evictions, who are predominantly affecting, of course, impoverished, right, in the intersection of folks of color and folks who are lacking access. And then thinking about national rights, I'm thinking a lot about voting rights. And voting rights tends to be a misnomer when you say it, because people hear rights as though it's a good thing, but rather we're talking about voting suppression, right? The effort around, whether it be through gerrymandering, limiting access to voting, limiting voting hours, limiting Sundays to the polls, limiting access where folks are trying to do what we say, do our duty to participate. And we see these anti-democratic pushes at the same time we claim to be a democracy. So I would say where the US lies in its measurement of democracy is as an issue for us now, particularly I would say as people of African descent, but really affects everybody. In terms of global Black politics, I will say that, of course, COVID, right, and the inequity around the COVID vaccine, particularly affecting Black and brown people globally, as a massive issue that we're facing, and of course, an issue that's left the news, and climate migrants, right? We see the response around some migrants and around others, right? The response for some refugees and not others. So the climate crisis is only going to illuminate these issues as they get more pressing, more and more pressing. And I'll leave it on this one. A global issue for us is global anti-Blackness and the various manifestations of global anti-Blackness, whether it be through support of white supremacist political candidates, whether it be through this issue of policing and its effect on Black lives is not just a U.S. issue, which is why we saw, folks. We saw folks in England. We saw folks in Brazil. We saw Black Lives Matter protests globally because it's anti-Black sentiment and resounding policing and state death tends to be an issue that follows. So I'll leave it there and I'll go to my next colleague. Professor, please hop in.
Thank you, Dr. Coney. I don't know what I can say. She gave a pretty comprehensive cover of the shoreline of these issues. So let me kind of add to some of what was said already. First, thank you so much for being a part of this conversation. I think this is an important discussion, and I really like the questions and the ability for us to highlight NCOBPS. And I as well would like to say greetings to my NCOBPS colleagues. Good to see you all. We don't get to see each other that often. And so it's beautiful when I get a chance to see everybody's faces, especially during this COVID period that we've been away from each other for so long. And so let me kind of divide my response into three categories. The question speaks to political science, and that is an essential focus of NCOBPS. Certainly, we understand the political issues that are relevant to Black folk in the United States and throughout the African diaspora are often the same political issues that are relevant to our brethren and sisters in the Latino community and other communities. But we do also recognize that NCOBPS was created, and I'm sure we'll get to this, so I'll be very, very broad here and let us get into the details later on. But NCOBPS was created, as was mentioned earlier, as a space for a very serious focus on the serious issues confronting populations of African descent here in the United States of America and other parts of the African diaspora. We set out, of course, to design a political science, a disciplinary approach to study those contradictions and to understand the extent to which they impact persons of African descent in a certain kind of way. And more importantly, perhaps most importantly, is to devise an approach to address them in the context of our discipline. The point that was made about when NCOBPS created is critical because it came out of a certain zeitgeist, right? It was a product of a certain energy. And what's interesting, as I was listening to Dr. Coney, is the consistency between the zeitgeist of that moment and what we're seeing now. And if indeed NCOBPS was created at a certain point in time, facing a certain set of realities, given the fact of what was said in terms of the intensity of those realities that are persistent and persisting, then it means that our discipline has a responsibility. So I would argue that the most important concern, one of the most important concerns as a discipline is for NCOBPS to be the space for the kinds of discussion that brought about the organization in the first place, and that will therefore help us provide answers. The old saying, a luta continua, right? The struggle continues. And as the struggle continues, the concern for NCOBPS, and I think for others, I don't know that we have a monopoly on this, but the concern is to continue to devise, develop, nurture, disseminate a political science, a Black political science that helps to address those realities that my colleague just skillfully laid out. That's my first point. The second point that I want to make, and I just have to just add this point because again, she made it so clear. The concern is the unraveling. The second concern that I want to speak to is the unraveling of the American experiment. Right? The unraveling of the American experiment, this experiment in democracy. It's often said that America does not necessarily have a long historical tradition of democracy. It doesn't have an established centuries, millennia, I should say, long practice. What we have is an experiment that's a couple centuries old, a very young experiment. And as such, this experiment can unravel. And the concern that we're looking at is the unraveling of this experiment. But more importantly, what are the implications of that unraveling? What does this mean for historically oppressed, repressed, marginalized, neglected groups within the American experiment. Indeed, if it is an experiment, it's an experiment to live up to the principles that were set. And if all around us we see the violating of those principles, then that suggests a concern that we must focus on. And when we are proud to have a space in NCOBPS where we take those concerns up. And so next week you'll see this week you'll see a healthy list of discussions that are both explaining to us what's happening and trying to provide some solutions going forward. And I really like the comments that were made about the global challenges. We are looking at it to the extent that there are challenges taking place within the American experiment. We can certainly see that those challenges are being duplicated across the world, or the United States is duplicating those patterns that are taking place across the world. Either way, as Kwame Nkrumah once said, when elephants fight, it is the grass that suffers. And as we see the unraveling of democracies across the world, as we see the rise of authoritarian regimes across the world, we're seeing the pushing back against internationally recognized human rights standards. We're seeing the threat of war unfolding right before our eyes in a flash second. When these global elephants are evolving, it is the people who suffer, and certainly our concern, among others, are African people. And so if that reality is the case, from the perspective of NCOBPS, we've always had a Pan-African sensibility, right? So yes, we are concerned with what's happening in California, and I'm in Tampa, Florida now. Spend most of my time in Atlanta, Georgia. Wherever we are concerned, but we also know that as NCOBPS, we have a concern about the struggles of people in Belize City, Belize, in Nairobi, Kenya, in Durban, South Africa, in Brixton, UK, and on and on and on and on. So this Pan-African stream that we've had, it's a concern now because we know that we have to link our analyses and our solutions to the realities confronting other persons who are dealing with similar, but not identical, but similar types of realities. And in doing so, NCOBPS becomes a part of an international formation of like-minded institutions trying to link up with each other and trying to bring about some significant positive change to confront all of our realities, right? So that we're not isolated. We are part of this global, because to the extent, this is my last point, to the extent that these global forces are beginning to unfold in ways that could be harmful to the diaspora internationally, is equal to the need for NCOBPS to be a space for us to develop linked responses thereto. In other words, and this is a kind of a selfish statement, so I want to just say it up front and just locate myself. We can't get out of this alone. To the extent that we know that there are challenges confronting us in the various parts of the diaspora, I'm going to submit that we can't get out of them alone, and we're going to need each other. And so the concern with regard to Black politics on an international level is the extent to which we can link with the positive, progressive, and just really inspirational work being taking place in other parts of the world. So I'm going to stop there. I think I kind of went over my part, and I'm going to pass it over now to my dear friend, Dr. Ore.
Thank you, Doc. So, well, first of all, to respond to Professor Willoughby Hirar's point about Jackson State and the students that we produced, I'm always proud to say that, you know, we've done a pretty decent job down here in producing 18 students. We placed 18 students of color in the PhD programs in the last 10 years. So that's something that we're really, really proud of. I'd like to just, you know, continue the discussion. I'll echo the sentiments of Professor Koné as it relates to critical race theory. So down here in Mississippi, critical race theory is described by some of the Black legislators as a solution looking for a problem. So that's how they've addressed it. We just had a bill introduced and passed. It's actually going to the governor's office next week. And what they did was they titled the bill Critical Race Theory. There's absolutely nothing in the bill that's related to anything remotely related to critical race theory. The bill actually says in a lot of fluff that there shall be no discrimination along the lines of religion or one group perceived to be inferior or superior. It was just some language that they put in there that has no relevance. No one's teaching that one group is inferior relative to another group. That's not even being taught. So they had the title as critical race theory. And that's obvious that, you know, they were attempting to employ the Southern strategy and, you know, to try and mobilize their base. There are those who are running for governor who actually initiated these, you know, these claims that critical race theory was being taught in the state. None of the legislators were able to define critical race theory. It's really sad that, you know, they continue to create these racial tensions in a state that really needs racial healing. And then, you know, along those lines, I'd say the biggest issue that we're facing here in the United States is white supremacy, as it is manifested through voter suppression. For example, voter suppression, I'll use Mississippi because Mississippi is actually a barometer for the United States. I mean, you know, Mississippi was birthed out of the United States. So I want to be clear that, you know, we're not an anomaly down here. We actually are representative of the United States. And so, you know, I look at felon disenfranchisement, for example. Here in Mississippi, in order to regain your right to vote, you have to petition the legislature to introduce a bill on your behalf. So only 9% of the bills get passed, right? And as it relates to felon disenfranchisement, those bills rarely get passed in terms of someone actually regaining their right to vote. So an individual has to approach a legislator to introduce a bill on their behalf, or they have to get it pardoned by the governor. So we have one of the most severe restrictions on felon disenfranchisement. You know, I've seen, I think over in Georgia, Professor Young, there's a proposal of a bill that was introduced that would give, it may not have been a bill, may have been a local policy, I don't know, that would give, would make registrars be appointed. And so this actually goes back to Mississippi in 1890, where they were actually having registrars being appointed as opposed to elected. And so there's been a lot of voter suppression issues. I mean, the Brennan Center does a great job of, you know, delineating each state, what they are utilizing. Voter ID, you know, going back to the Supreme Court's decision, whereby in Holder, where they struck down Section 4, and by extension struck down Section 5, and that's really important here in Mississippi because pre-clearance is really important because there's so many shenanigans that take place in the legislature. You know, for example, voter ID, that we do need to have these laws that are put in place. The moving of precincts, for example, you know, now they don't have to be pre-cleared. And so that's a really big issue. And the fact that the Biden administration did not make this a priority is problematic. And then the last thing I'll say is trauma. Trauma as it relates to Blacks and other marginalized groups. But police encounters, COVID anxiety, and all of these have an impact on mental health. And so even though they are forms of mental health, we actually did some research that shows that individuals who avoid the police, individuals who have COVID anxiety related to COVID and anxiety related to police encounters are more likely to score really high on these negative mental health inventories. So I'll stop there and hand it back over to Professor Willoughby Harrod.
Thank you so much for reminding us both about the legal context that we're in and also the public health and mental health context that we're in. You know, when I listed off all the things that we prepare students in and that we're interested in, I did not talk about constitutional law. I mentioned political psychology and our kind of intersections. You've done major research for the past 20 years on these kinds of questions of psychology and the politics intersecting there. But thank you for that reminder about Shelby B. Holder. And feel free, any of you all, to drop factoids in, because this will be recorded. And if there's citations that you think our Pi Sigma Alpha audience would need to have to be able to understand what we're talking about, please feel free to drop in some factoids for them. So our next question is, tell us about what you study and how you have refined your questions, how your research question evolved between doing a BA, an MA, and a PhD. And I know some of you also have funny stories about traveling to different parts of the world to do your training. And so we'll have Dr. Felicity Stone Richards and Zara Ahmed and Jasmine Noel Yarish, and you each have about 4 minutes apiece.
Thank you, Tiffany, and thank you to Pi Sigma Alpha organizers and NCOBPS for putting this panel together. It's a really exciting opportunity to discuss really important issues with my colleagues, my future colleagues. So my name is Felicity. I'm a PhD student at UC Santa Barbara, and I study Japanese political theory and Afro-diasporic political theory. And where this came out of is that actually I did history as an undergrad. I studied Southeast Asian and Northeast Asian diplomatic and military history. And the reason for that is because these were the courses that were on offer. There was one professor who taught anything related to Black things, and he taught African religion. And I wasn't able to get into his classes in second and third year, and I was assigned to a Southeast Asian history class. And it turned out it was amazing because the professor was really young, he was really gung-ho, absolutely fantastic teacher. And so throughout studying this whole region, you know, I managed to study basically a different side to the British Empire than I had understood before, because up until then, most of my knowledge was, you know, West Indian and African based. I didn't really have a sense of that part of the world or how Euro-American empires had affected that part of the world. But I also really love Japanese culture because, you know, I'm a millennial, I grew up with anime. And so for me, I started learning Japanese while I was also studying East Asian history. And even though I wasn't studying Japanese imperial history, that is now coming in to the fore. And so, you know, after I graduated, I, you know, was privileged enough to be able to go to Japan to attend a Japanese language school. And then I decided to do Japanese studies for my MA, where I was now focusing on Japan and now, you know, Japanese politics, Japanese imperial history, and Japan's racial issues. And so through this, I am now coming to try and formulate, okay, what are the questions that I'm interested in? You know, I was really interested in questions of honor and sort of saving face in military negotiations, like the problem of trust in diplomacy. And this was then now filtering down to the sort of local domestic effect of how, you know, how does trust in politics work, and how does this work now if you're a minority population who has no reason to trust anybody in your society, no reason to trust the institutions, no reason to trust the majority ethnic population, and sort of how do you get the majority ethnic population to realize their complicity in your oppression? And so this is what took me to, you know, exploring the American theorists, and my primary, you know, guiding lights are the white political philosopher Stanley Cavell, James Baldwin, and Alice Walker. And the reason why it's these three people is because these three people were all talking about this problem of acknowledgement in similar ways. They were all talking about how, you know, where how the soul is sort of gets broken and mutilated under oppressive systems, that we actually become incapable of, empathizing and recognizing the pain of other human beings, and how to nurture soul communication. And this is a fundamental part of the sort of theoretical paradigm that I'm working with. But I'm also trying to apply that to the Japanese context and find Japanese writers who also think about the soul and oppression in similar ways. And, because we don't want to be ignorant of the sort of surrounding cultures of any of these theories, this basically means that I am now studying the entire intellectual history on the African-American side and the entire intellectual history on the Japanese side. And also because my father's Jamaican, I'm like, well, I'm not going to ignore the West Indians, so let's also study them too. And so this is how I've basically formulated two spheres where I'm basically a source of Japanese politics, but also Northeast Asian political sphere and the sort of Afro-diasporic political theory. And as much as possible, when I can merge them, I do. And being in these two spaces has allowed me to also now be in the Afro-Japanese intellectual space, which is to say the study of Japanese people who have used Black political thought, who have used Black culture to now inform their own political practice and their own cultural practice, which is an amazing intellectual space. So through this, all these very strange, all these strange journeys that also are a question of luck. It just happened to be the case that I stumbled into East Asian history because this is what's on offer. This is now where I'm in this space, and sort of my passions and my interests, but also luck are why I'm here. And it's a really fun journey to be on.
Thank you so much, Felicity. Zara?
Thank you, Tiffany, for inviting me, and thanks to all my colleagues for being here. I'm taking lots of notes. I'm really appreciating your wisdom and just the ways that you are helping me connect the dots in terms of all of these pressing issues and the feeling of being so overwhelmed. But I'm taking heart just from being part of articulating these issues and acknowledging that these are important and that we are working our way towards answers to these questions or towards addressing them. And so as I was thinking about this question of how I came to my questions, I thought about when I was about 24 years old and I lived in Atlanta. I just moved there. I went to Southern University for undergrad and I moved to Atlanta. And I was puttering around my new apartment and I came downstairs and the TV was on, and it was A Great and Mighty Walk, the interviews with John Henrik Clarke, great, masterful Black historian. And it was towards the end, and back then you didn't have rewind. So I just kind of sat down. I'd never heard of him. So I sat down in my living room, and it was at the end, and he said, we have to find a vision. We have to have a vision for how we will clothe and educate and feed our people. We have to figure that out so that we can then move forward to making that happen, because no one else is going to do it for us. And that was at the end. And then it went off. And I remember I sat there and I said out loud, I said, but I don't have a vision, John Henrik Clarke. And that question stayed with me, and it was so powerful, and it was intimidating to be charged with that. But that is actually how I felt, like it was a charge. And so in addition to, kind of feeling intimidated and feeling lost, I just kind of started living that question, what are possible visions? And so at this point, it's really become a way of life to think about and to articulate and to structure my work in a way that helps me understand our current circumstances and our current context and the historical rooting of those contexts, in an effort towards constructing a vision of power for Black futures. And so over these many, many years, that larger context of constructing a vision has taken shape spiritually, it's taken shape personally, and it's taken shape professionally. And all of these aspects are interconnected, which has been really important to me as well. Thinking more about rather than research question, or rather than career or job, thinking about my vocation, thinking about what is the work that I'm called to do. That's one of the questions that I've asked myself continuously, and I try to hold myself accountable to what comes up in response to that. And so the research that I have done has evolved over the years of me asking that question. And so I have a bachelor's degree in English literature from Southern. I have a master's degree in social work from Georgia State University. And then I have my PhD in political science from UC Irvine, where I was blessed to meet Tiffany and have her on my committee. And so over these years, though, of me being educated and experiencing formal education, I also came to a critical consciousness of my need for education for liberation, liberatory education. And that led me to understand, and this is something I share with my students, to understand that I can't look for anyone else to educate me. I have to educate myself. And if I am not getting answers to my questions in my classes, then I have to find them myself. But that first means I have to have the questions. And so I mentioned sharing this with my students, and I have really two arms to my research right now. And one of those arms is critical pedagogy. It's looking critically at how I teach and how I can use my classrooms as a lab for students to be able to practice politics, for students to be politically engaged right now in my classes, to get credit for them, to get points for them, but also to have support. And so I tell them my goal is for them to see themselves as political actors. And I speak to them in ways that affirm, like, this is what I am seeing, this is what I'm hoping for you. And what I've seen over time is that they start to internalize that. So it's not one day, maybe if I know enough, maybe I'll engage in some political action. We're doing it in class, and I'm constantly affirming that and revealing that, elevating that fact for them, so that by the end of the class, when we reflect on our actions, they have confidence, and they can confidently say in the class, but also to their peers, to their family members, that they are political actors, because they had to be. And that's been very rewarding, constantly evolving. And I would like to extend that work. Right now it's with college age youth, but I'd also like to extend it with non-college youth, because I know that the majority of Black youth are still not in college. And that's where, that's an impact that I want to make. The other arm of my research, I used to think of it as not necessarily connected, but I'm realizing that it is. And so I'm studying what I call culturally rooted contemplative practice. And so I've had a Buddhist practice for about 25 years. And I used to think of it as just kind of my separate personal practice. But over the last 10 years or so, I've been integrating it into my classrooms. And again, articulating, moments of silence and the practices of bearing witness and honoring our ancestors and our communities, and different practices that I've brought in. And so I became affiliated with the East Bay Meditation Center. I'm about 10 miles outside of Oakland, and they have a program. They have multiple programs, but I participated in one where they were training social justice activists to see themselves as change agents. And that really excited me, because I saw an organization, and I see an organization not just talking the talk, but actually walking the walk in terms of trying to scale up this idea beyond individuals being social change agents, and explicitly telling everyone in the program that the expectation is that we take our training back to our respective communities and we engage in social change there. And so that there's a ripple effect that the organization intentionally creates. And I am studying, I'm calling that revolutionary leadership, and I'm really studying the organization and the participants in the organization. They are using contemplative practices kind of as that foundation of what they're teaching in their curriculum. But then too, that cultural rootedness is important, because, and I love the organization because they embrace this, but it's not only about adhering to some kind of strict or idealistic or anti-Black version of what Buddhism or what contemplative practice is. And so there's this willingness, this radical inclusivity, I call it, a willingness to acknowledge that when we need to connect with spirit, our cultures can help inform us. They help strengthen us. And as an African American, that's been really important for me. So again, I'm kind of taking this personal journey, this aspect of my personal journey, and translating it into a research agenda so that they're kind of mutually supporting one another. So that's just a little taste. And I will pass it on to the next professor. Is it Jasmine?
Yes.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for being here and for having me as part of the space. I'd love to see all of the NCOBPS family always. And of course, connections across my journey as a student and as a teacher and and continuingly to be a lifelong learner of all of you. So my name is Jasmine Noel Yarish. I am a first-generation college student at the undergraduate level, let alone the graduate school level. And I grew up on a bicentennial family farm in central Pennsylvania in the Appalachian Hills. So my journey actually connects back to that space in a lot of ways. I was an undergraduate at Hobart and William Smith Colleges in Geneva, New York, also kind of on the fringes of Appalachia in the Finger Lakes region in upstate New York. And I started my journey studying politics and race through French and Francophone studies. So I started from a linguistic perspective. I was a language student. And it was actually there where I had an amazing African diasporic faculty from Cote d'Ivoire, people who were raised in Algeria and who studied on all parts of the Francophone diaspora as well as the African continent. And it was actually in the French school that I learned about racialization. I read Frantz Fanon and Albert Memmi, all in French. And it was there that I actually got the language for thinking about critical race, not in my political science degree, even though I was a dual major in political science as well. And in political science, what I got was a really good historical view of state development, but also political economy. So what I study is the intersection between modernity and capitalism. And the answer to that question became really more and more acute the longer I was in school. As I said, I was the first to go to college, but I wound up doing my master's degree in England at the University of Essex and was trained by discourse analyst school thinkers there with the context that I was living in England was actually the 2008 presidential election. And I didn't want anything to do with American politics. I was not an American politics student. That was not my jam. I wanted to study the world because the United States is such a small little fraction of the world. But I was working with a woman who was a white South African who studied apartheid and was a Cavell scholar and a Derrida scholar. And she kind of guided me because I was looking at the concept and the question of inheritance through Jacques Derrida's language. And she said to me, she's like, wait, maybe you should look at the United States, look at what's happening. And I ended up writing my master's thesis on the presidential election of Barack Obama and Barack Obama's own conceptualization of inheritance and how that fits into a very global question about racialization and othering and all of those kind of sorts of things. It was a really great experience for me to be able to sit from the opposite end of the Atlantic and watch what was happening and be able to reflect and write on these questions. I wound up at the University of California, Santa Barbara for my graduate degree, where I got introduced for the first time the historical and political science literature by W.E.B. Du Bois. We don't necessarily always think of W.E.B. Du Bois as a political scientist. A lot of people think of him as a historian or a sociologist. There's a great book called A Scholar Denied by Alden Morris, who kind of reclaims his work for sociology. But we all know that Du Bois wanted to found political science in the United States. He went to Germany to study from those, the kind of first people to develop the discipline of political science. And of course, Clark Atlanta is where he did so much of that great work. And my work, my scholarship is about reclaiming Du Bois, but also reclaiming the people that Du Bois left out of that conversation. So I'm going to come back around. Who did he leave out? he left out Black feminist political thinkers. It was actually my relationship to Black feminism that made me rethink my own relationship with the space that I grew up. It was reading Bell Hooks that I realized that Appalachia is not white. It's a complicated, racialized space. It has a lot of people who want to claim whiteness, but there's also a lot of people who are white that are never really considered white. And there's also tons and tons of people of color in Appalachia. So it's those kind of questions that oscillate around modernity and capitalism that continue to ground me, and no matter if I'm working on Black feminist contributions to the Reconstruction era in Philadelphia between 1850 and 1880, or I'm looking at the twice failed election of Paula Jean Swearingen in West Virginia and what that means for the context of an interracial democratic future that we at NCOBPS try to think through and push as part and parcel of our conversations on a daily basis. So thank you so very much.
Wow, I hope you all are catching all this rich self story and making that our colleagues here in NCOBPS are offering you. You can see from how rigorous we are in our conversations that in NCOBPS, you may be a super senior scholar, you may be a graduate student, you may be an undergraduate student, and we all excel together. We have incredibly high standards. You know, if you are listening to Felicity or listening to Boris or listening to me, you are going to hear just excellence. It's just about excellence. It's about the work, and it's about our love for our people. We don't play when it comes to our love for our people, which means our love for all people. Our final and last question, which will kind of be a little bit like a lightning round, and I'm going to be real like Jeopardy about this. We have 2 minutes each to answer this question. What makes NCOBPS an important space for you to do your scholarly work? How does it connect to other platforms, venues, audiences that you engage with your work? And how is NCOBPS different? And we'll start with Dr. Ricks. And we're going to also make sure that you get extra time at the end because this is the first time you're getting a chance to present.
Thank you, Tiffany. First of all, I'd like to thank the panel Pi Sigma Alpha and NCOBPS for such a interesting and definitely timely panel. Thank you for inviting me, and thank the panelists for such informative presentations thus far. First of all, I want to begin by having a land acknowledgement here at California State University, Northridge, of which I'm coming from. And we would not like to acknowledge the Sensafian tribe here and the land upon which we reside. The land was their land, and we are renters. So with that, I want to move on and just basically touch upon what Professor Willoughby suggested we touch on, right? I think that I think NCOBPS is a reservoir. It's a reservoir for a number of things, but what's most important is NCOBPS pushes and pulls at the same time. What NCOBPS does is pushes scholars, and particularly African-American scholars, but welcoming of all BIPOC scholars to do their best and put their best foot forward. And they do that by providing conversations upon textbooks. What textbooks are we using? Syllabi, how are we updating and maintaining that our syllabi are current and relevant? What resources are we using, which are really, really important. And secondly, the camaraderie. NCOBPS is welcoming as any venue I've ever attended and became a member of. If in fact you attend an NCOBPS meeting, you will see the diversity, the inclusiveness, and the equity in and amongst the scholars, the presenters, the graduate students, the undergraduate students, faculty, sponsors, and et cetera. And that's really, really important. I think that's really, really important. Another thing is, NCOBPS does a great job of connecting scholarship. It does a great job of seeing intersectionality from both a global a regional and local perspective. And I think local is really, really important. Why is local really important? It's coined by the infamous Tip O'Neill, all politics is local. NCOBPS not only welcomes the understanding of local politics, but it also brings in the importance of community-based organizations, community organizers, and those who are involved in social justice, which may not intersect disciplinarily with political science. I think this is really, really important. So NCOBPS provides a scholar with an opportunity to hone and sharpen their scholarship, allows one to receive reviews, receive critique, and receive positive reinforcement from those who can assist with moving the educational platform forward. Also with regard to research and publications, a very, very resourceful avenue there, and a place where the intersection of theory and practice is really, really important. How the classroom becomes a laboratory, as you know, most of the scholars have mentioned thus far. And I think what's really, really important is, NCOBPS allows us to see how important teaching Black politics is in not just HBCUs or minority serving institutions, but how important it is to have Black politics taught in TWIs, have Black politics taught in places where Black faculty aren't. Having Black politics taught at institutions, what does that mean? What does that look like? That means that we have to do the job of ensuring that folk are comfortable teaching Black politics, folk are comfortable infusing their syllabi with Black politics, textbook, literature, etc. And we have to be comfortable in ensuring that we want Black politics to be taught at HBCUs, but we certainly want them to be taught at other institutions. And that means that there have to be some intersection, because if in fact they aren't Black scholars at institutions, we still want Black politics taught. And I think that's how the connection is for NCOBPS in terms of the global connection, the national connection, and then regionally, because it's really, really important that the community-based organizer or community-based organization sees themselves within this participatory framework. And it's important. When I mean participatory, I mean community-based participatory research. We need to be able to look at we need to be able to look at the groups that we're studying and view them as subjects and not objects. And so with that, I'll stop there and say that, NCOBPS has been an extremely informative and beneficial vehicle, not just for research, but also for the scholarship of teaching and learning as well. And with that, I'll turn it over to the next panelist. I'm not sure who that is. So Tiffany, if you bail me out, yep. I will not feel bad at all.
I got you. Thank you so much. It's Dr. Kone.
Okay. So to be brief, what stands out to me the most about NCOBPS and the experience I have received from NCOBPS would be mentorship. NCOBPS was the push I needed to complete my master's degree. I had gotten accepted to the conference. I went for the first time, and then I was blown away by the support that I received. I remember it, and I don't have the best memory, but I remember the discussant was Anne-Marie Hancock, who had read my paper, and then when I was done with the panel said, you know who you need to talk to? You need to talk to Mark Sawyer, who was in the back. She made the connection for me that ended up being, that led me to my PhD program. That moment led me to staying connected with my advisor. It led me to UCLA, to my program. I mean, the mentorship and the community was central to that moment of my life, and it remains central. not only in receiving that mentorship, but moving on to the position of becoming a mentor as well.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kone. Dr. Young.
Thank you so much. I have a minute, so let me be brief. Again, one of the beauties of conversations like this is that so much is so rich. As Bar said a moment ago, you hear mention of the thoughts that you have, and indeed, Dr. Ricks mentioned something that 2 points that I think are critical in terms of why is NCOBPS an important and special place. And I'll just be really brief. One is that it is a space for us to be able to engage in the liberatory work that we think is critical. Liberation work. And let's demystify that term. It means to free oppressed people and oppressed groups from the realities that confront them. And NCOBPS is a space to do that. We all will be confronted at some point with the ability or inability to publish such works in mainstream journals. To be able to have space to discuss such works on panels at various conferences, mainstream conferences. At NCOBPS, we remove that. We demand rigor and we demand excellence in our work, but we create the space for us to do liberatory work. And I think that's critical to be able to have that space. NCOBPS comes out of a tradition where, as many other entities in the other disciplines, such as psychology and history, groups were created to focus on the Black experience. And NCOBPS is one of them. And the last piece that's critically important that Dr. Ricks mentioned, I don't need to get into it, is the connection to community. NCOBPS provide that link to community as they are in search of answers to the concrete realities that they face in the work that they are doing. Thank you. Sorry, Tiffany, for going over.
No, you're excellent. Thank you so much, Dr. Young, for re-emphasizing that point. Felicity Stone-Richards.
Thank you. I mean, for me, NCOBPS, again, it was this sort of training in how to build community. Because the minute I entered NCOBPS, it wasn't just the case that, Professor Willoughby-Harrod and Professor Yarish were sort of extraordinary in helping me think through ideas, in contacting everyone that was even, in some way relevant to the work I would want to do. But it was also showing me how to do that myself, how to actually be a good mentor myself. Because if you don't actually experience that, if you don't know how to set up professional opportunities for your students, then, if this has never been done for you, how are you going to know to do that for your students? So for me, the really extraordinary thing about NCOBPS is that I actually now know there are skills here that I have learned because I've benefited from them. And now I know how to do this for my students. I'm literally, Professor Yarish invited me to, be a guest lecturer in one of her classes. It would never have even occurred to me that, oh, we're on Zoom, we can do that now. Now I can also do that. Sharing syllabi to see how other, political theorists teach their subject. All of these things are things that would never have occurred to me unless older colleagues had, given me these opportunities. So I think that's, for me, what has been most rewarding about NCOBPS.
Thank you so much, Felicity. Dr. Ori.
Yeah, so first and foremost, I'd like to say mentorship. We try and bring as many students as possible. At one point, there was this competition as to who would bring the most students, and we had the Pipeline Award. And so, I even think about Tiffany, that sometimes you try and mentor students and it just doesn't work. And so Tiffany stepped in, not to make it personal, but she stepped in and mentored a student that, she did a great job of just connecting with the student and helped me to understand better, the student. It's a genuine, it's a place where we get genuine friendships. Curry and I sat in a room once, just talking about, just general life, and he was supposed to give me some music, and he came one year, he said, well, I didn't bring my jump drive, I don't have enough space, but he made sure he got me that music. So, it's just a place, it's refreshing. Sometimes you can be in places where you just don't have the human capital to talk about, issues related to Black politics, and you come there, it's a safe space, you're not in a foreign space where you have to convince people that you have a serious research question, it's valid, and people get it, and you don't have to spend, so much time trying to convince them as you would at some of the I forget what we called it. We actually did a paper on this in group specific conferences versus, I guess, traditional white conferences. So I'll stop there.
Dr. Ori, can you put the link or the title? Can you cut that into the chat?
Okay.
Next, we'll have Dr. Ahmed.
So I was thinking, I was kind of brainstorming some words that came to mind as I was thinking of why NCOBPS is an important space to me. And what I ended up with, words like refuge and support and nurturing. And the word I came to is incubator. For me, NCOBPS feels like an incubator space, because in addition to that refuge and a place for support, it's also a space for thinking boldly. It's a space where I feel comfortable taking ideas and reaching out to my community and asking, so, where should I go with this? How can I connect it with other scholars who are doing similar work, with a strong foundation, but also what are ideas moving forward? And I always feel rejuvenated, and that makes me feel ready to continue. And so, that phrase, the struggle continues, it reminded me of my mentor, Dr. Joseph White, the father of Black psychology. That's how he used to sign all of his correspondence to me. The struggle continues. And so I feel like in that space of being an incubator, NCOBPS helps me be rejuvenated so that I can go and continue the struggle and be a support and be a mentor for others.
We are going to have two more comments, one by Dr. Yarish and then by Kubawani, and then we're going to run over a minute or two, but we'll just manage it. Go right ahead, Yarish.
Okay, great. So thank you so much. One of the things that I want to re-emphasize about NCOBPS is that it's also a space for HBCU faculty, students, and friends. And I say that as a member, as a faculty member at NHBCU, the only public university in the nation's capital and for the nation's capital, the University of the District of Columbia. It's important to note that Forbes magazine stated that HBCUs have the most diverse faculty amongst all higher education institutions in the country in 2021. They have 56% African-American or Black faculty, 24% white faculty, 9.5% Asian faculty, 2.5% Hispanic faculty, and then 0.7% Indigenous and 0.7% two or more other races, whereas PWIs are 69% white. I want to say that again because at the beginning of Black History Month, HBCUs, including the University of the District of Columbia, received death threats. And those are targeting not just Black bodies, but us who are in solidarity with our Black brothers and sisters who work on those spaces. And it's much about policing and making fear amongst people of color as it is amongst their allies. So I want to reemphasize that point. And finally, because this is the Pi Sigma Alpha conference, 37% of HBCUs have Pi Sigma Alpha chapters. We need to make that larger. 37% can get to 50 next year, can get to 75% the next year. So I just want to send that out. And I think NCOBPS is the place to push that work. So thank you so very much.
And Ms. Bowani.
Thank you, everyone, so much. I'll just add to this beautiful discussion as an aspiring graduate student who is actively receiving the mentorship of members of the NCOBPS community. This is nothing like working in other academic circles in the sense that the work that is done and the ideas that are shared within NCOBPS, it's all personal. This political science is so personal, and that is what makes the quality of the mentorship utterly unlike anything else that I've ever received at academic institutions in my life. And that there's something really exhilarating about working at the juncture of critical theory, academic discussion, but also political action. And moments when I find myself in discourse with y'all, I really feel that we are operating in the dream of our ancestors. We're kind of presiding over a global Pan-African network of minds, making sure that we take stock of what is going on for our community and uniting that situation with the hardest theory that we can come up with and that we know of in order to unite to progress a specific action that will literally save lives. There's something so urgent about NCOBPS that I just want to underline, and that's all I'll say. Thank you.
My name is Dr. Tiffany Willoughby Herard. I'm the president of the National Conference of Black Political Scientists, and I am coming to you from the Tongva and Ahachiman land, where I am privileged to learn and grow. I thank my NCOBPS colleagues and my Pi Sigma Alpha colleagues. See you all at NCOBPS. If you haven't registered, you better get it together. Get it together so you can be in the right place and be having the right conversations. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.